One of the first things I noticed when playing Far Cry 5 for the first time was the user interface, or the UI. Yes, that is genuinely my opening gambit for this video. A big thank you to anyone who sticks around after this point. Now, I noticed the UI in Far Cry 5 because of how unnoticeable it was. I know that sounds extremely pretentious, but please hear me out. The UI is hardly ever there, and when it is there, it's very small, it's very subtle. It never gets in the way of this really nice open world that Ubisoft has spent millions and millions of dollars creating. Far Cry 5 is, as far as I'm concerned, a pretty significant reboot for the Far Cry series, mainly because of one big, obvious change in the way that the developers are actually thinking about these games now, by taking things away from the game. What do I mean by that? Well, they're taking things off the screen, they're clearing up the massive to-do list that you'd normally have in a Far Cry game, and they're getting rid of all the clutter. In the same way Assassin's Creed Origins freshened things up with the AC series, Far Cry 5 takes the formula and structure of a Far Cry game and takes a few big bites out of it. And by removing some of the flabby, video gamey blobules of rubbish that the likes of Far Cry 4, for example, was weighed down with, they have created what has to be one of the most immersive first-person open-world games we've had in years. Ubisoft have chiseled away more of the marble to reveal a much better statue underneath, or I don't know, something like that. I am not good at metaphors. And for me, it does really all start with the UI. Please do hear me out. The HUD elements are really small, like I said, but they only stick around for as long as they're needed as well. They fade out really quickly and unnoticed, and yet they always seem to be there when you need them. Your ammo counter, for example, fades out almost instantly from the bottom right of the screen. But as soon as you reload or fire your weapon, it reappears at pretty much the exact moment that you might glance down for a quick look to see how much ammo and grenades you have ready to go. By the time it disappears again, within literally a second or two of reappearing, you're already looking back at the center of the screen, looking at the actual game and not the game's interface. It's actually a brilliant little bit of design. Now, the other thing is the minimap from previous Far Cry games, which has completely gone. So instead of a minimap, which takes up too much of the screen and all too often diverts your eyes away from the actual game, they've gone for a Skyrim-style compass that runs along the top of the screen. It's very small, it's very subtle, and it gives you just about enough info to get your bearings without A, dragging your eyes away from the game too much, or B, giving you so little information that you end up hopping into the map screen every 5 seconds. You don't need to stare at a mini-map all the time now, and it's brilliant. It's much better for it. You're just looking at the game itself. Likewise with the inventory, which pops up on demand, that's pretty lean in its design and is basically completely see-through, so you can still see a lot of what's going on in the world behind it whenever it is on screen. What all that does is keep you focused on the game itself, the game's world, the actual thing that you paid $60 to play. Far Cry as a series may not be among the worst offenders when it comes to bad, distracting UI, but Ubisoft games in general certainly have been. And the UI is the kind of small detail that will very quickly make older games look more and more dated in comparison. But this isn't going to be an entire video about UI elements. that would be so boring, man. Yeah, God, I'd hate a whole video about that. Because it's not just about taking bits of the user interface, the heads-up display, away from the game or making them fade out after a while or whatever. The whole of Far Cry 5, all the design philosophy around it, is about making sure you spend your time in the game, in the world, not looking at the boring stuff like menus, inventory screens, and mini-maps. And a lot of this actually comes from last year's Breath of the Wild, a game that was praised for shaking up the open world formula. I actually think that Far Cry 5 is one of the first signs that Breath of the Wild could turn out to be one of the most influential games we've seen in years. With the arrival of Assassin's Creed 2 back in November 2009, Ubisoft had settled on a formula for open world game design, and it was a formula that many other studios followed along with as well. You choose a location for your game, usually a city, you let the players run around it, often with some kind of free running mechanic, and you make sure there's lots and lots and lots of things to run up to and do in it. Certainly a big open world, the kind that was set out by Grand Theft Auto 3 back in 2009, 2001, that was no good anymore. It had to be a big open world full of little icons to run up to, full of side quests, no matter how repetitive they might be, full of things to collect, full of secret chests to open, and full of towers to climb. Ubisoft announced early on into their Far Cry 5 marketing campaign that towers were gone from the game, and as is by now well known, they even poked fun at it right at the start of the game. Climbing towers was a staple of the Ubisoft open world formula, of course, a way of gating an open world map behind a fog of war that could only be cleared by climbing a tower that gave you a nice bird's eye cutscene of the surrounding area, complete with a handful of new icons that needed running up to and ticking off the endless list of jobs that you had to do. The tower was the first and most important job of all, opening the door to a bunch of other jobs that needed doing. This is something Ubisoft has clearly realized as well, that jobs are not fun. Giving us loads of work to do isn't a good idea, and taking towers out of Far Cry 5's open world is a clear statement of intent from the company. The way you pick up quests now is much more natural, much more fluid, and crucially, it's much less of a chore. Far Cry 5's open world design is much closer to the Breath of the Wild school of thought, letting cool stuff and fun things to do fall your way naturally, in a way that doesn't feel like you're being overwhelmed with things to do. There's also even a hint of The Witcher here as well, where NPCs give you just enough to care about what it is that they want you to actually do. So you end up with less jobs to do at once, but a much clearer focus and motive to go and do the things that sound fun. And when you do need to look at a map, when you do open up the map screen, it's a much nicer thing to look at. A lot of Ubisoft's map screens recently have been really nice, really nicely designed semi-3D models of the world that you get to occupy in game. But in many of Ubisoft's games, you couldn't actually see them because of how many icons it had on top of it. Now, all of that's gone. It's much more streamlined. A lot of the things don't actually appear until you zoom in close enough on the map to see it. And thanks to the absence of the towers, the way you actually explore the map now is completely different. The fog of war is only cleared when you explore those areas. You can see that that part of the map is covered in the fog, therefore you have not been there. You have not been inside that area. You don't know what's in there. Opening up the map in Far Cry 5 is now a pleasure. It's a good thing to do. It's fun. It's an enticing prospect to see an icon popping up on the map. It feels a lot more significant. It feels worth it. It feels like you should go over there and check it out. That has not been the case in a lot of Ubisoft games in recent years, and it makes a massive difference. That is where the Breath of the Wild influence comes from, and it's great to see open world design moving away from what was set out in Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and all those types of games, moving into something that's a bit more adventurous, a bit more open, a bit less structured. It's not about ticking off jobs and crossing things off a list anymore. It's just about going out into the world, talking to the characters in the world, seeing what they've got to say, and when they tell you about something that's going on over in the distance, over at that ranch over there, over in that town, over in that little farmstead, you want to go there and see what's happened. Now, this is by no means a review of Far Cry 5, but it's just a little run through of some of the cool things I think Ubisoft has done and deserves some credit for. Of course, the game is not perfect, and I'm not saying it's the best the series has ever been. It's not nearly as detailed as something like Far Cry 2, which was incredibly ambitious for the time, but there are some cool things here, and importantly, some big signs, some big indications of the way that AAA open world game design is going and the way things will go in the future. I think you can see some serious influence from Breath of the Wild in this game, and it would surprise me an awful lot if more companies didn't pick up this line of thinking for the foreseeable future. Ubisoft has done an awful lot of things right designing this game, mainly by taking things away, by making the right decisions, by thinking about it, and not just taking the more content equals better game approach that has actually weighed down so many of their recent titles. I only hope this kind of new way of thinking actually carries over to the other upcoming Ubisoft projects like The Division 2 and the next Assassin's Creed, which we've already seen rumoured. Are you playing Far Cry 5? Let us know what you think of it down in the comments below. Remember to leave a like and subscribe if you happen to enjoy this video. Dislike if you're not actually that asked about user interfaces and that. There should be a link to Patreon on your screen right now if you want to support the channel, and another video if you want to watch some more of our stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.